Electrical inspectors sometimes have differing interpretations of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, regarding junction box accessibility. In this situation, the specific issue revolves around a junction box located within a Juno TC47 4-inch low-volt new work housing recessed lighting fixture, where the specification sheet indicates that the fixture is Underwriters Laboratories, or UL listed for through-branch wiring. The inspector wants to verify that the junctions within the fixture are accessible as required by Section 314.29 of the NEC. The UL listing for through-branch wiring typically implies that the junction is accessible for the purposes of the NEC. However, the point of contention arises when the inspector insists that the junction must be accessible without removing any part of the fixture, a condition that may not be met by the design of the recessed lighting fixture. This interpretation is often considered unreasonable, as it goes beyond the intent of the NEC and the scope of the UL listing. Addressing this type of issue requires a clear understanding of the NEC requirements and the UL listing standards. Section 314.29 of the NEC states that junction, pull, and splice boxes must be accessible without removing any part of the building structure or finish. The intent is to ensure that these boxes can be inspected, maintained, and modified without causing damage to the surrounding building elements. The UL listing, on the other hand, certifies that a product meets specific safety standards and performance criteria. When a fixture is UL listed for through-branch wiring, it means that the internal wiring and connections have been tested and approved for use in a branch circuit. This includes the accessibility of the junction box for wiring modifications and inspections, assuming that the fixture is installed according to the manufacturer's instructions. To resolve the disagreement with the inspector, it is essential to present a well-reasoned argument based on the NEC and the UL listing. Firstly, explain that the fixture is UL listed for through-branch wiring, which means that the junction box meets the necessary safety and accessibility standards. Secondly, point out that the NEC does not explicitly state that the junction box must be accessible without removing any part of the fixture. The requirement is that the box must be accessible without damaging the building structure or finish. Thirdly, provide the inspector with the manufacturer's specifications and installation instructions for the fixture. These documents may provide additional information about the accessibility of the junction box and the intended installation methods. If the inspector remains unconvinced, there are a few additional steps that can be taken. One approach is to request a second opinion from another inspector or a senior official at the local electrical inspection authority. Different inspectors may have different interpretations of the code, and a second opinion could help to clarify the issue. Another option is to consult with a qualified electrical engineer or a code expert who can provide a professional opinion on the matter. An expert's opinion can carry significant weight and may help to persuade the inspector to reconsider their position. As a last resort, it may be necessary to disassemble and reassemble the fixture to demonstrate the accessibility of the junction box. While this is time-consuming and costly, it may be the only way to satisfy the inspector and obtain approval for the electrical installation. When dealing with electrical inspections and code compliance, it is important to maintain a professional and respectful attitude. Clear communication and a thorough understanding of the NEC and UL standards are essential for resolving disagreements and ensuring a safe and compliant electrical installation. In summary, the key points to remember are the UL listing for through-branch wiring implies accessibility for NEC purposes. The NEC does not explicitly require accessibility without removing any part of the fixture. Providing documentation and seeking second opinions can help resolve disagreements, and disassembling the fixture should be a last resort. Now let us elaborate further into the world of electrical inspections, UL listings, and NEC compliance. The accessibility of electrical components, especially junction boxes, is a cornerstone of electrical safety and maintainability. Electrical codes, primarily the NEC in the United States, are designed to ensure that electrical systems are installed and maintained in a manner that minimizes the risk of electrical shock and fire. UL listings provided by Underwriters Laboratories are certifications that indicate a product has been tested and meets specific safety standards. These standards are often referenced in the NEC. Junction boxes serve as protective enclosures for electrical connections, protecting them from physical damage and environmental factors such as moisture and dust. They are integral to ensuring that wiring splices are safely contained. The NEC mandates that these junction boxes be accessible for inspection, maintenance, and modification. The specific requirement for accessibility is outlined in NEC Section 314.29, which states that junction boxes must be accessible without removing any part of the building structure or finish. This means that the junction box should be reachable without having to tear down walls, ceilings, or other permanent building elements. The reason for this requirement is simple. Electrical connections can degrade over time due to corrosion, loosening, or physical stress. Periodic inspection and maintenance are necessary to identify and correct these issues before they lead to electrical hazards. If a junction box is buried behind a wall or ceiling, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to perform these essential tasks. In the case of the recessed lighting fixture, the issue of accessibility becomes more nuanced. The fixture itself is UL listed for through-branch wiring, implying that the internal wiring and connections have been tested and approved for use in a branch circuit. However, the inspector's concern is that the junction box within the fixture may not be accessible without removing parts of the fixture itself. This raises a question of what constitutes accessibility in this context. The NEC does not provide a precise definition of accessibility, leaving room for interpretation. Some inspectors may interpret the code to mean that the junction box must be accessible without removing any screws, covers, or other components of the fixture. Others may take a more lenient view, arguing that as long as the junction box can be accessed with reasonable effort and without damaging the building structure, the requirement is met. To understand the intent of the NEC, it is helpful to consider the overall context of electrical safety. The code is designed to protect people and property from electrical hazards, but it is also intended to be practical and reasonable. Electrical installations should be safe and reliable, but they should also be cost-effective and easy to maintain. Imposing overly strict requirements can increase the cost of electrical work and discourage homeowners from making necessary repairs. In the case of the recessed lighting fixture, requiring the junction box to be accessible without removing any part of the fixture may be an unreasonable burden. The fixture is designed to be installed in a specific manner, and the junction box is an integral part of that design. Removing parts of the fixture to access the junction box may damage the fixture or create new electrical hazards. A more reasonable approach would be to allow access to the junction box by removing a cover or loosening a few screws, as long as this can be done safely and without damaging the building structure. When faced with a disagreement with an electrical inspector, it is important to remain calm and professional. The inspector is responsible for enforcing the electrical code, and their primary concern is safety. Arguing or becoming confrontational will not help the situation. Instead, try to understand the inspector's concerns and address them in a respectful manner. Gather all relevant information about the electrical installation, including the manufacturer's specifications, the UL listing, and any relevant sections of the NEC. Present this information to the inspector in a clear and organized manner, explaining why you believe the installation meets the requirements of the code. If the inspector remains unconvinced, consider seeking a second opinion from another inspector or a senior official at the local electrical inspection authority. Another inspector may have a different interpretation of the code, or they may be more willing to consider your perspective. You can also consult with a qualified electrical engineer or a code expert who can provide a professional opinion on the matter. An expert's opinion can carry significant weight and may help to persuade the inspector to reconsider their position. As a last resort, you may have to comply with the inspector's demands, even if you believe they are unreasonable. This may involve disassembling the fixture to demonstrate the accessibility of the junction box or making other modifications to the electrical installation. While this can be frustrating and costly, it is important to remember that the inspector has the authority to enforce the electrical code, and their decision is final. Moving forward, it is essential to be proactive in ensuring that electrical installations meet the requirements of the NEC. This includes carefully reviewing the code before starting any electrical work, obtaining all necessary permits, and following the manufacturer's instructions for installing electrical equipment. It also involves communicating with the electrical inspector throughout the project to address any concerns or questions they may have. By taking these steps, you can minimize the risk of disagreements and ensure a smooth and successful electrical inspection. Additionally, it is beneficial to stay informed about changes to the NEC and updates to UL standards. The electrical industry is constantly evolving, and new technologies and techniques are being developed all the time. Keeping up to date with the latest developments will help you to ensure that your electrical installations are safe, reliable, and compliant with the latest codes and standards. In conclusion, the accessibility of electrical components is a critical aspect of electrical safety and maintainability. The NEC requires that junction boxes be accessible for inspection, maintenance, and modification. While the definition of accessibility can be subject to interpretation, the intent of the code is to ensure that electrical connections can be safely and easily accessed for necessary work. When faced with a disagreement with an electrical inspector, it is important to remain calm, professional, and well-informed. By gathering all relevant information, presenting it in a clear and organized manner, and seeking second opinions when necessary, you can increase the likelihood of resolving the issue and ensuring a safe and compliant electrical installation. Now let's consider some additional factors that can influence the interpretation of accessibility requirements. The type of building, its occupancy, and its intended use can all play a role. For example, the accessibility requirements for a junction box in a residential dwelling may be different from those in a commercial building or an industrial facility. In a residential dwelling, the primary concern is the safety of the occupants. The electrical system should be designed and installed in a manner that minimizes the risk of electrical shock and fire. However, the accessibility requirements may be somewhat less stringent than those in a commercial building, where the electrical system may be more complex and subject to more frequent maintenance and modification. In a commercial building, the electrical system is typically more extensive and serves a greater number of people. The accessibility requirements are therefore more stringent to ensure that the system can be easily inspected, maintained, and modified without disrupting business operations. In an industrial facility, the electrical system may be subject to harsh environmental conditions and heavy loads. The accessibility requirements are therefore the more stringent to ensure that the system can withstand these conditions and remain safe and reliable. Another factor that can influence the interpretation of accessibility requirements is the age of the building. Older buildings may have electrical systems that were installed before the current codes and standards were in place. These systems may not meet the current accessibility requirements, and it may not be feasible to upgrade them to meet those requirements without significant renovation. In such cases, the electrical inspector may take a more lenient approach, allowing the existing system to remain in place as long as it is safe and well maintained. However, any new electrical work in the building must comply with the current codes and standards, including the accessibility requirements. The specific location of the junction box within the building can also affect the interpretation of accessibility requirements. A junction box that is located in a readily accessible area, such as a hallway or a utility room, may be subject to less stringent requirements than a junction box that is located in a hard-to-reach area, such as an attic or a crawl space. In readily accessible areas, it is generally easier to inspect, maintain, and modify the electrical system. In hard-to-reach areas, it may be more difficult to perform these tasks, and the accessibility requirements may therefore be more stringent. Finally, the qualifications and experience of the electrical inspector can also influence the interpretation of accessibility requirements. Some inspectors may have a more thorough understanding of the NEC and UL standards than others. They may also have more experience with different types of electrical installations. Inspectors with more knowledge and experience may be better able to assess the safety and compliance of an electrical installation and may be more willing to consider different perspectives. In summary, the interpretation of accessibility requirements can be influenced by a variety of factors, including the type of building, its occupancy, its intended use, its age, the location of the junction box, and the qualifications and experience of the electrical inspector. It is important to consider all of these factors when assessing the accessibility of an electrical installation and when communicating with the electrical inspector.